Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
You are listening to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is Christian Taylor, and thank you for clicking on today's recording. In this one, our Indiana Jones adventure continues. Last week, I covered Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom to celebrate the film's 40th anniversary. And now today, the adventure continues. In this recording, we are going to be covering Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, because this movie has its own anniversary as well. As of this year, this movie is 35 years old, so I thought it'd be a good choice to cover this one next. And then I will wrap up this adventure next week when I cover Raiders of the Lost Ark. So for now, let's get into Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now this film I'm super excited to cover because this is actually my second favorite Indiana Jones movie. For any of you who've been listening to the show for the last year or two now, you will know that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is my favorite. And my second favorite is this one. And I might have a controversial opinion here, but I do think that this movie is better than Raiders of the Lost Ark. I know a good majority of the Indiana Jones fans consider Raiders of the Lost Ark to be a masterpiece movie, and I agree with them. That movie has like almost no flaws, and I would also say the same thing for this one as well. I just find myself enjoying this one more than Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't know why. I'm kind of curious, like, how many fans out there actually consider this movie better than Raiders. But yeah, when I was a kid growing up, like, this was one of my favorites to watch. Like, when I was a kid, I would wear my Indiana Jones costume every time I watched the movies, and I would act out, like, all the fight scenes, and this movie was my favorite one, I think, out of the... So, this was before... So, I'm talking main trilogy. So, before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had came out, that's when I became an Indiana Jones fan, like, only a couple of years before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. So, this would have been roughly around 2006. I would have been about 7 when I started watching the movies. And my favorite scene, or my favorite movie out of the trilogy to act out scenes in was Last Crusade. I thought it had the most fun action scenes. Like, I'd be pretending to be jumping on, like, the couch and stuff, pretending that it was the tank. I had a very big imagination as a child, but this movie was my favorite to act out as a kid. And I think this movie has the second greatest story in the entire franchise. The first one being Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but in second place, in my opinion, is the story in this movie, and I'm very excited to cover it. So, this film is 35 years old, as I said. It came out in the year 1989, and man, I just now, like, not too long ago, I really did realize, like, man, 1989 was a big year for movies. Like, you had the first Tim Burton Batman movie, you had Lethal Weapon 2, you had Rain Man, Ghostbusters 2, Back to the Future Part 2. Like, there was just a lot of good stuff, you know, coming out during that time. It was a very good year for movies. And just to give you an idea on how well this movie did that year, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is now the second highest grossing film of that year. I looked on a website and it showed that, you know, the top grossing film of that year was the first Batman film by Tim Burton, but in second place was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade with a total box office of $474.2 million. So yeah, this film was a huge, major success. And I also like to think that this movie was kind of Spielberg's way of apologizing for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which I don't think he had any reason to apologize, but later on in the recording I have some trivia about the filmmaking and stuff, And I believe in one of the things that I'll read to you, I think it goes into more detail explaining Spielberg's mindset for this movie, because due to all the criticism and negative feedback that he got from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, he wanted to make sure that he didn't repeat that same, way, that same formula again. So he wanted to make a way more, lighthearted movie like Raiders. So we'll get more into that as we progress through the recording. So the next thing I would like to read to you is a quick little story summary of the plot for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So in this third installment, famous archaeologist Indiana Jones sets out to rescue his father, who is also very interested in history, has vanished while he was searching for the Holy Grail. Following clues in the old man's notebook, Indy arrives in Venice, where he enlists the help of beautiful academic, but they are not the only ones who are on the trail, as some sinister old enemies soon come out of the woodwork, those enemies being the Nazis. So the plot of this movie is that Indy and his close friend Marcus Brody set out to find out what happened to Indy's dad, who vanished while he was searching for the Holy Grail, and they get help from this very young and very attractive woman named Elsa, and this trio try to figure out what happened to Indy's dad, while also slightly trying to see if they can find the Holy Grail themselves. So it's a very good plot, and it's kind of cool in this installment. We get to learn more about Indy's backstory and where he got the nickname Indy and, stuff like that. So very good. I mean, that's a good plot. Very, very good. Doesn't give too much away anyway. There's a lot going on in this picture. So, as we look through the data here, so the movie was released on May 24th, 1989. Director, of course, Steven Spielberg, and the story was written by George Lucas and Menno Meyjes. The movie was distributed by Paramount Pictures, United International Pictures, Paramount Home Entertainment, based on characters by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman. And here is a big note that I want to make crystal clear here. So, remember how I mentioned back in my Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny review how the movie, even though I enjoyed it, it was destined to fail, because Dial of Destiny had a budget of over $300 million. Like, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny would have had to have done extremely well just to break even. It was insane. Guess how much budget Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had? $48 million. That's it. This movie only had $48 million, and it went on to gross over $470 million. The lesser your budget is, the better chances your movie has of doing good. Like, I just can't fathom that. Like, here's another statistic that blows my mind. We all know the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? Peter Jackson from the early 2000s. Each movie had a budget estimating around $90 million. And meanwhile, Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny had a budget of $300 million. Like, that is insane. Disney seems to have this mindset that, like, the bigger the budget, the better, but it's like, no, it's the exact opposite. That just blows my mind. You look at these movies, from 30, 40 years ago that did extremely well, and then you see how low the budgets are. Then you look at today's film budgets, like, it is insane. The budgets that movies have now are insane, and the movie is going to have to do extremely well just to make its money back. Like, it's crazy. You can have a lower budget and still make an amazing film. There are tons of movies from 40, 50 years ago that had budgets in like the thousands, and the movies went on to gross millions of dollars. It's just so crazy to think about the budget differences from back then to now. And as we continue, here's a quick little read-off of the main actors in this picture. So, of course, up first, we have Harrison Ford. Nothing else I can really say about him that I haven't already said. Legendary actor. And up next, you have another legendary actor, the late great Sean Connery, who is probably very well known for playing James Bond. He is the OG James Bond, and he ended up playing him 7 times. And up next, we have an actress who I just found out recently. She was around my age when they filmed this. I had no idea she was that young, but her name is Alison Doody. And up next, we have the late great River Phoenix, who played Indiana Jones back during the opening scene where we go back in time to 1912 when Indy was a young teenager. River Phoenix sadly passed away back in the early 90s at the age of 23 years old from, I believe it was a drug overdose, and it's really sad. He was a very brilliant young man who had a very promising career ahead of him, and it's just really sad, that he's been gone for over 30 years, and he did such an amazing job playing young Indiana Jones in this film. Like, his performance was perfect. He was a amazing casting choice. And up next we have Julian Glover. Up next we have Denholm Elliott. And up next we have John Rhys Davies and Michael Byrne. And that is going to be the listing of the main actors in this movie. All give amazing performances. Now, let's get into one of my favorite sections when covering a film. Let's get into some trivia about the making of this movie. So, here is some trivia about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So, as with other Indiana Jones movies, Harrison Ford did many of his own stunts, and according to stuntman Vic Armstrong, he had to pull Ford to one side and ask him to let him do some work. Because Ford was doing so much of the action himself, Armstrong later said if he wasn't such a great actor, he would have made a really great stuntman. Now, I think that's just so funny to me. It just shows you, how committed, Harrison Ford is to playing Indiana Jones. He loves playing this character. If they had done more movies in, the 90s, I think Ford would have said yes to every single one of them. He loves playing this character. He actually theoretically played Indiana Jones 6 times. So you have the 3 main movies in the 80s, but he also played Indiana Jones back in the early 90s for an episode of the Young Indiana Jones show, which only ran for a couple of years. And then, of course, he did Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and then he recently just did Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But back in those 80s films, I think this was even true in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but Harrison Ford really loved doing his own stunts, and he liked doing the fight scenes and everything, because I remember watching an interview once that he did for Dial of Destiny where he says that with each film he tries to up the stakes in any way he can, because he said he views his fans like customers who have come to see my product, so I'm going to do my very best to give them one hell of a show. It was something along those lines, so it just shows you he's a really committed, actor, trying to give his fans the best product that he can give them. So I have to give him respect, to have that mindset. So as we continue here with the list, next trivia. Most of the uniforms worn by the Nazis in the Berlin book burning scene are authentic World War II uniforms. They were not replicas. A cache of old uniforms was found in Germany and obtained by costume designer Anthony Powell to be used in this movie. Harrison Ford nominated River Phoenix to play him as a teenager, having worked with him before on his favorite of his many movies. It was a movie called The Mosquito Coast, which came out in 1986. When describing how he prepared for playing the role, Phoenix explained that he didn't really base his portrayal on the Indiana Jones character, but on Harrison Ford, so he observed Ford out of character before acting his part. Anthony Powell, going back to this costume designer, found it challenging to recreate Sir Sean Connery's costume because the script required the character to wear the same clothes throughout the movie. Powell thought about his own grandfather and incorporated tweed suits and fishing hats. Powell felt it was necessary for Henry to wear glasses, but did not want to hide Connery's eyes, so chose rimless ones. He could not find any suitable ones, so he had them specially made. The 4 horses used in the final scenes outside of the temple were loaned to the movie personally by King Hussein of Jordan. During the tank sequence, when Harrison Ford was riding the horse, his hat kept getting blown off during each take, and there's a behind-the-scenes clip that you can find where Harrison grabs a nail gun and he nail guns the hat to his head, and they finally were able to capture the shot. And what's crazy is that I was watching an interview clip the other day where Harrison said he still has tiny little scars around the front of his head from when he did that. And he says, when you're an actor, you gotta do anything to get that shot. Yeah, you could say he was definitely very committed to getting that scene shot. So Sean Connery, who I mentioned before, played James Bond, and there's this nice little Easter egg. So towards the end of the movie, the main villain, Walter Donovan, carries a Walter PPK pistol, which is the same model that James Bond used. And in the movie, Sean Connery gets shot, or Sean Connery's character, Henry, gets shot by that same pistol. So James Bond gets shot by the same pistol that he used in the movies. I thought that was a nice little James Bond reference. So Sean Connery improvised the funny and famous line she talks in her sleep. So the scene in question that trivia is talking about is that shortly after Indy and his dad are captured, right before that, it was revealed that Elsa was working for the Nazis the entire time, and she was playing Indy to get him to bring Henry's diary that has all the notes about his quest for the Holy Grail and bring it all the way back to that castle so that the Nazis could use it to locate the Grail. And you find out that while Henry was working with Elsa, he also slept with her, just like Indy did. So, and then we find out about this through, because Henry knew that Elsa was a Nazi before she revealed herself as a Nazi. Then Indy was like, how did you know she was a Nazi? And then his dad says she talks in her sleep. So now we know that Henry did sleep with Elsa as well. And then you see this little, Harrison gives this little smirk, and apparently that was genuine, he wasn't acting. Sean Connery came up with that little bit of dialogue, she talks in her sleep, like on the spot. It just shows you what a great actor he was coming up with stuff. Like, the more I research movies, the more I realize is that a lot of the most memorable dialogue is thought up by the actors, like on the spot, because they understand their characters very well. But it's kind of crazy to me, like literally my acting teacher back in my college, which was Eastern University in Charleston, I had to take a acting 1 class during my last year at Eastern, and my teacher told us how important it was to stick to the script, but I was scratching my head on that because it's like if you go back and look through all kinds of films from history, like some of the most famous dialogue ever meant or ever read was thought of on the spot by the actors themselves. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you know when to stay on the script but also go off script? You know, like how do you make that decision? You know, it's like it's a crazy thing. You know what to think? You know, it's like, do you say exactly what's on the paper or do you paraphrase it as like an example? I don't know. It's just trying to put yourself in an actor's position where it's okay, do I just strictly read this word for word, or can I come up with my own stuff? Like, I don't know. I don't know, like, how directors and crew, I don't know, like, the rules specifically, if they're really strict on that kind of thing. Just kind of crazy to think about. So, over 2,000 rats were specifically bred for the catacomb sequence when Indy and Elsa underneath the library they walk down one of the hallways and they find that it's full of rats. And they bred 2,000 of them for that scene. So again, that scene for me was just like the bug scene, where it's like, can you imagine being the actors and having to walk through that? I would have been like, heck no. I don't care how much money you pay me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this scene off. Like, ugh, man, just gross. Hate rats just as much as bugs. And now here's one of my favorite trivia about this film. So they incorporated Harrison Ford's real-life chin scar. They incorporated it into Indy's character because, now don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure I read somewhere years ago that Harrison Ford injured his chin from a small like car accident or something, and he still has the chin scar to this very day. So throughout the 80s, he always has that scar on his chin. But with the Indiana Jones movies, they incorporated it into Indy's character. And what they did was, so going back to that 1912 opening sequence that I mentioned earlier, when Indy is in Boy Scouts, funny enough, like I'm an Eagle Scout, so I thought that was pretty cool. Indy and his friend are exploring this tunnel entrance inside this cave system, and they find this group of guys digging, and they find a cross that used to belong to Coronado. I don't know who that is, but anyway, the cross is like very famous, and Indy wants to steal it from them because he says it belongs in a museum. So he steals it, runs off, gets on his horse, and the bad guys chase Indy on their little 19-teens cars, and it leads to them running to a train, jumping on it, and it was a circus train. Indy ends up falling into one of the cars, and it has a lion inside of it. And Indy, of course, as anybody would be, is scared out of his freaking mind because he's now face to face with a huge freaking lion. And then he notices that there's a whip inside the car, so he grabs it, swings the whip at the lion, and the whip comes back and it hits Indy right in the chin, and it starts bleeding. So that explains like why Indy has that scar on his chin. I thought that was a cool thing to do, to incorporate that into Indy's character. So here's another funny little fact here about the book burning scene that I mentioned earlier, where all the extras were wearing real life Nazi uniforms. So when they were filming that scene, the Nazi extras were asked to cross their fingers behind their backs. So like literally they'd be doing, the Nazi pose where you raise your hand up in the air like that, and then they would have their other hand behind their back, crossing their fingers. Now, the reason why the extras were told to do that, I'm assuming it has something to do with along the lines of, like, maybe, like, putting their hands behind their backs and crossing their fingers is maybe, like, telling the universe, like, hey, we really don't mean what we're doing here. Like, we do not support the Nazis in any kind of way. We're just trying to pull a scene off, like, maybe them crossing their fingers is kind of like, we really don't mean to be doing the Nazi symbol. We do not support them in any way, shape, or form. We're just acting. I think that was what they were trying to say anyway, but now this next portion here, I want to talk about my 10 favorite scenes throughout the entire movie. The first one being the opening flashback, then it cuts to present day. Indy finally gets the items. So, going back to the 1912 opening sequence, Indy loses. He takes the artifact all the way back to his dad's house, but the bad guys that were chasing him got the sheriff, and Indy was forced to give the cross back to them. But one of the main bad guys was very impressed with how Indy almost won, right? And he had huge respect for him. He walks up to Indy, takes off his fedora and says, "You lost today, kid. That doesn't mean you have to like it." And then the bad guy places the hat on Indy's head, and then it cuts to present-day Indy in 1938, trying to get that cross back again. And he meets the bad guy in the white suit and hat that took it from him all those years ago. And then Indy finally escapes off. They're on a ship in the middle of the ocean. He's fighting all the bad guys. Indy gets to cross, jumps off the boat. A wave washes over, and it makes the entire boat explode. And then Indy manages to get a life raft. Now, how he got back to land, we don't know. But you're just going to have to expand your disbelief, because he was literally out in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of nowhere, and he somehow made it back to shore. How? We don't know, but who cares? That whole opening sequence was so amazing. Like, that shot of Indy getting the hat and it cuts to present day Indy. Oh man, that single shot was so freaking good. And then Indy finally wins. He doesn't go home empty-handed this time, and he brings the cross back, gives it to Marcus back at the college after Indy wraps up teaching his class. Oh, it was so amazing. Finally he wins. Belloc's not here to steal this artifact from him. Anyway, the next scene is the underground tomb and the Ark reference. So, the whole sequence of Indy and Elsa searching the underground tomb, trying to find that knight that's buried with the other marker that they need in order to get more information about where the Grail is. That whole sequence was done so well. That entire tomb set was so beautifully done. And I love that little Ark of the Covenant reference where Indy and Elsa walk by this wall, and Elsa's like, "What's this?" And Indy's like, "Ark of the Covenant." And Elsa's just like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yep, I'm sure." And for a split second there, you hear a little glimpse of the Ark of the Covenant theme from Raiders. Oh, it was just a nice little reference there. Love that. Now, I think one of the most important scenes in this film and why it works so well is that the love interest is working with the bad guys this time. Like, when Elsa betrays Indy, it's like, wait a minute, the main girl's not supposed to betray the main guy. That's not how this is supposed to go. But there are no rules, man. And Elsa's backstab, like, seriously, I'm sure for most people it's like, wait, what? You're not like Marion and Willie. You're supposed to be helping Indy. You know? Like, her betrayal, it's like, dude, it's crazy. Like, wait a minute, the main girl is not supposed to betray? What the heck's going on here? Well, there are no rules. She can. And Elsa did straight up backstab Indy. Now, the next scene that I absolutely love is the first half of the castle escape. So, Indy and his dad are tied up in these chairs, right? In this giant room full of artifacts. And then Jonathan, Elsa, and that Nazi officer just leave them there with no bodyguards whatsoever. And then they try to escape. Indy realizes that he has a lighter in his pocket because for some reason the Nazis decided not to check his pockets to make sure he didn't have anything else on him. But again, just span your disbelief there. And then Indy tries to tell his dad to reach for the lighter to try to burn through the ropes. Henry drops it, and then the carpet starts burning up, and the fire starts, spreading throughout the entire room. Then Indy and his dad have to start, like, trying to, move around and find places, safe places to go so they can try to break free from the ropes. Then Indy eventually yells at his dad to go hide in the fireplace. And then come to find out that fireplace has a hidden door to a secret back room where Nazis are operating, and Indy finally manages to get free of the ropes, and then they escape. They get their stuff back, and then later on they get trapped in another room. And he's like, "There's gotta be like a secret doorway, passageway, something." Then Henry's just like, "Well, if I just sit down and just think," and then he sits down in this chair and it goes backwards, and then a secret stairway reveals underneath Indy, and Indy falls down the staircase. And Henry's just like, the solution presents itself, just sit down and think. Oh man, I love that part so much. And then now we get into the second half where Indy and his dad decide to escape the castle by getting on a motorcycle with a sidecar on it. They drive off, but then a bunch of Nazis on motorcycles follow them, and then then Indy and his dad have to escape them, right? So Indy and his dad are driving, trying to escape them. Indy ends up grabbing a a flagpole, and he jousts with another Nazi driving towards them, and Indy just knocks him right off the motorcycle. And then another Nazi comes driving up next to him, getting ready to shoot them. Then Indy at the last minute, puts the pole inside the motorcycle's front wheel, and it sends the guy in his motorcycle flying through the air. It's extremely over the top, but it works so well. I mean, let's face it, the whole Indiana Jones franchise is crammed full with over-the-top stuff. But do I care? Not in the slightest. But that whole motorcycle sequence was brilliantly shot, amazing action piece, and I love that little detail at the end where Indy's laughing where they finally got away from those Nazis, and he looks over at his dad, and then his dad just gives him this look of like, I am not impressed in any kind of way. Then he just starts adjusting his pocket watch. Then he just looks away with pure, disappointment on his face. It was kind of funny. Like, his dad didn't give him the reaction he was hoping for. But, the next, action sequence that I want to talk about here, it's in my opinion, one of the greatest sequences in the entire movie. The tank battle. Dude, where do I even start with this? The entire tank battle was so well done. I watched that scene on YouTube every other day. The tank fight sequence is one of my favorite action pieces ever put to film. It is brilliantly done. I could do a full analysis. The entire tank sequence lasts 6 minutes. But it feels a lot longer than that. Can you imagine how long it took them to make that? But man, the amount of effort they put into it, it pays off so well. It is so amazing to see. Marcus and Henry are inside the tank. The main villain, one of the main villains, is this Nazi officer who's inside the tank, right? And Indy's, being chased by the tank while he's on his horse. And he's trying to, maneuver around the tank, trying to find a way to get on top of it so he can get inside and save Marcus and his dad. So it goes on for a little bit, of Indy getting chased, and the tank is firing rounds at him. And then later on during the sequence, Indy rides alongside the tank and he stuffs a rock, inside one of the side gun holes. And a guy goes out to try to fire it, and it fires back and it kills him. And then later on, the main Nazi comes out of the port cover on top of the tank, and then Indy and him have a shootout. And then Indy decides to ride his horse up on top of a high point, and then he jumps off the horse onto the tank. And then a Nazi truck shows up, and then Nazis start jumping on top of the tank, and now Indy's fighting Nazis on top of a tank. It's just dude, it just keeps, the situation just keeps escalating. And then one of my favorite moments during this fight sequence is where Indy manages, right, to pull a pistol out of one of the Nazis' holsters. He fires it. The bullet goes through 3 Nazis in a row, and then they just fall over. Then Indy, for a split second, he just has that look holy cow, did I just do that? And then that main Nazi officer shows up behind him and then wraps chains around his neck and starts to strangle him. It just keeps escalating. And then the officer starts, pressing Indy's face on the track as it's going around. And then Indy's dad manages to break free in the tank, and he manages to blow up one of the other Nazi trucks carrying soldiers. And then Indy ends up falling off the tank, and now he's hanging off one of the guns. And this is a stunt that Harrison Ford did. He's hanging off the tank while it's driving against the hill, and he's having all this rock and debris falling on top of him. Meanwhile, you have the Nazi officer whacking him over and over again with a shovel. And then Indy notices that they're trying to crash him into the side of the hill. But then at the last minute, Henry manages to defeat the remaining Nazis inside the tank. And Marcus helps out. He whacks one of the Germans on the head with a empty shell. and then the Nazi accidentally fires a round that goes ricocheting all throughout the room, and it hits the Nazi driving the tank, and it makes the tank take a giant left turn, and Indy misses the rock. He climbs back up, socks that Nazi in the face, and then we get this funny scene of Henry popping out of the porthole, and he just goes, "You call this archaeology?" You know, then Indy and Henry and Marcus manage to get off the tank as it drives off a cliff, and Indy was still on the tank when it goes over the cliff, but then at the last minute he manages to grab a vine and pull himself back on top on the ground. And Henry, Sala, and Marcus are just staring over the edge, right, thinking that Indy just died. Then Indy just walks up like, "What are you guys looking at?" And then, you know, Henry grabs Indy and gives him a huge hug, and it's just like, "Finally, Henry, you gave your son attention. Like, finally." You know, it's just, it's so good, man. Like, words do not do it justice. If you haven't seen this movie, watch Raiders, watch Temple of Doom, and then watch Last Crusade. They are so good. They're amazing. Man, that whole take sequence is just so amazing. Like, I could do a full analysis that's like an hour, just talking about that scene on its own. Now, the next scene, now this is another huge fave of mine, is the 3 challenges section, where, so, I'll set up the scene for you. So, Indy, Sala, Marcus, and his dad get captured again by the Nazis. They're inside the temple now, and someone has to go through the 3 challenges in order to get to the room where the Grail is. And every single one of Donathan's men keep getting killed because they have no idea how to get through the challenges correctly. So Donathan's telling Indy, "Okay, you're gonna do it." Indy's like, "I'm not gonna help you." So then Donathan shoots his dad, and his dad is now on the ground dying, and Indy realizes he has no choice now. The healing power of the Grail is the only thing that's going to save his dad, so now he has no choice but to go through the challenges. So he walks up to that first challenge, he opens up his dad's book and starts reading his notes, trying to see if he can figure out how to get through each challenge. So the first one, you're the penitent man. The penitent man is humble, and he kneels before God. That was when Indy realizes you have to kneel. He kneels down, and he misses the saws that were killing the Nazis. That was challenge number 1. Challenge number 2. Indy walks a little further down the corridor and finds that a section of the floor is covered in lettering. And what he has to now do is, he has to spell the name of God. And the name of God is Jehovah, but in this instance, Jehovah is spelled in the Latin form of Jehovah. It begins with an I. But Indy makes a big mistake in thinking it starts with J. He falls through the floor, picks himself back up, then he realizes, oh yeah, in Latin, Jehovah starts with an I. So he has to walk on the individual letters spelling out Jehovah, and he gets through. Now we get to the third and final challenge, the Leap of Faith, where Indy has to take a leap of faith. It's this giant chasm with an entrance on the other side that's extremely far away. And Indy decides to take a leap of faith. He steps his foot out, he drops, and then he doesn't fall. It's an invisible bridge. It's this like optical illusion thing. The bridge is there, but it shows up invisible. So Indy walks across the invisible bridge, and I like the little detail where Indy grabs a hand of dust and throws it along the bridge so now that he can see it. Nice little detail. And then Indy finally crawls through this little hole and makes it inside the Grail room, where the last of the 3 brothers who guard the Grail is waiting for him. That whole sequence was so I can't even put into words just like how amazing it is. The way it's shot, like the three challenges themselves are just, they're so interesting and cool. Like, this was the best, like, traps, in my opinion, that we saw in the movies. They're just simply the best. Now, there's this funny little thing about this movie I found out very recently, is that the main girl's name is Elsa, right? And so we all know that Elsa dies in this because what happens is she tries to run off with the Grail and it can't leave that temple. So the minute she crosses the seal that's on the ground, the entire temple starts falling apart. Then this giant cliff forms over her. She falls. Then he grabs her. He's trying to pull her up, but she won't give him her other hand because she's trying to grab the Grail Cup. And Indy is like telling Elsa to let it go. Give me your hand. I can't hold you. Get it? Her name's Elsa. She won't let it go. Wink, wink. You know, like, I sent my mom this funny picture the other day where it has Anna in a Indiana Jones costume, like, holding on to Elsa while she's trying to grab the Grail. It's just so darn funny to me. It's like, I wonder, it's like, did Disney watch this and be like, okay, guys, we gotta think of, like, names for our two sisters for this Frozen film. Does anyone have any ideas? Like, can you imagine, like, one of them's, like, at home thinking, I don't know what to name our characters. They were just, like, randomly watching, like, Last Crusade. Then they see Elsa. They're like, Elsa. That's our name choice. There it is, you know? And then she couldn't let the Grail go. And Elsa slips from Indy's hand and she falls to her death. That's just something that's just so darn funny to me. And I'm, of course, talking about the movie Frozen. The main girl, her name's Elsa, and she literally has a song later on in the movie called Let It Go. So I just thought it was just a funny little coincidence. I just thought that was kind of a funny thing about, you know, about that has aged extremely well. And following this scene, in my opinion, is one of the greatest moments in the movie, where Indy falls over the edge, and now Henry is holding on to him, and then Henry's telling Indy to give him his other hand so he can pull him up, and Indy's also now trying to reach for the Grail Cup, and he's like, I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad. Then Henry says, Indiana, let it go. And then Indy looks at him, and then then Henry grabs Indy's hand and pulls him back up. For the first time in the movie, Henry finally lets go of the Grail and calls his son Indy and tells him to let it go. And Henry pulls him up, and Henry finally realizes the real treasure on this adventure was reigniting his relationship with his son. And I love that last moment of Henry and Indy looking at the night as he waves goodbye to him. Then they run out of the temple as it falls apart. That whole scene just, oh, dude. I don't even know what to say. It's so beautiful. It's amazing. It's breathtaking, man. Master filmmaking at its finest. Like, what else can you say about it other than the fact that it's so freaking well done? And then that final shot of Indy, Sala, Marcus, and Henry riding off into the sunset on the horses is so well done. Now, I know a good majority of the fan base says that the story should have ended there. But for me, I'm glad the story continued. I loved Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's my favorite. And I think Last Crusade's ending is very good, but I still think there was more story that could be told. I really think that. And I'm glad Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out and added more to the story. But still, that final shot of them running off into the sunset, it was a nice little farewell, a partial farewell to Indy and them for a good almost 20 years till Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. But yes, it was a very darn good final shot for that movie. So that was me talking about my 10 favorite scenes in the movie. So for the remaining time, I'd like to go into some more facts about the filmmaking. So let's get into more information about the making of this movie, and I want to give a shout out to Wikipedia, which is where I got my information from. So, after the criticism that Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom got, Spielberg chose to make a more light-hearted film for the next installment, as well as bringing back several elements from Raiders of the Lost Ark. During the 5 years between Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, he and executive producer George Lucas reviewed several scripts before accepting Jeffrey Baum's script. Filming locations included Spain, Italy, West Germany, Jordan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So George Lucas and Steven Spielberg had intended to make a trilogy of Indiana Jones films since Lucas had first pitched Raiders of the Lost Ark to Steven Spielberg back in 1977, though they signed for 5 films with Paramount Pictures by 1979. After the mixed critical and public reaction to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Spielberg decided to complete the trilogy to fulfill his promise to Lucas, with the intent to invoke the film with the spirit and tone of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Temple of Doom writers Lord Hack and Gloria Kaz chose not to return due to both having other commitments and feeling satisfied with their work in the second film. Throughout the film's development and pre-production, Spielberg admitted he was cautiously regressing in making the film due to his commitment to the film. The director had to drop out of directing Big and Rain Man. Now, this next bit I want to read to you regards the making of the tank that was used for the tank sequence that we covered earlier. So, mechanical effects supervisor George Gibbs said the film was the most difficult one of his career. He visited a museum to negotiate renting a small French World War I tank, but decided he wanted to make one instead. The tank was based on the Tank Mark 8, which was 11 meters long and weighed 28 short tons. However, some liberties were taken with the design. Gibbs built the tank over the framework of a 28 short ton excavator and added 7 short ton tracks that were given by 2 automatic hydraulic pumps, each connected to a Range Rover V8 engine. Gibbs built the tank from steel rather than aluminum or fiberglass because it would allow the realistically suspensionless vehicle to endure the rocky surfaces. Unlike its historic counterpart, which had only 2 side guns, the tank had a turret gun added as well. It took 4 months to build and was transported to Almeria on a short Belfast plane and then a loader truck. The tank broke down twice. The distributor's router arm broke and a replacement had to be sourced from Madrid. Then, 2 of the device's valves used to cool the oil exploded due to solder melting and mixing with the oil. It was very hot in the tank despite the installation of 10 fans, and the lack of suspension meant the driver was unable to stop shaking during filming breaks. The tank only moved at 10 to 12 miles per hour, which Vic Armstrong said made it difficult to film Indiana riding a horse alongside the tank while making it appear faster. A smaller section of the tank's top, made from aluminum and which used rubber tracks, was used for close-ups. It was built from a searchlight trailer, weighed 8 tons, and was towed by a 4-wheel drive truck. It had safety nets on each end to prevent injury to those falling off. A quarter-scale model by Gibbs was driven over a 15-meter cliff on location. Industrial Light and Magic created further shots on the tank's destruction with models and miniatures. So that was some pretty cool information about the filming of the tank. Like, I knew when I was researching stuff about this film, I really wanted to learn some more additional information about the tank sequence, and that was some pretty cool information. Now, this next bit I'm going to read to you goes into more detail about the 3 trials that Indy goes through. So Spielberg devised the 3 trials that guard the Grail. For the first, the blades under which Indiana ducks like a penitent man were a mix of practical and miniature blades created by Gibbs and ILM. For the second trial, in which Indiana spells Jova on stable stepping stones, it was intended to have a tarantula crawl up Indiana after he mistakenly steps on Jay. This was filmed and deemed unsatisfactory, so ILM filmed a stuntman hanging through a hole that appears in the floor 30 feet above a cavern. As this was dark, it did not matter that the matte painting and models were rushed late in production. The third trial, the leap of faith that Indiana makes over an apparently impassable ravine after discovering a bridge hidden by forced perspective, was created with a model bridge and painted backgrounds. This was cheaper than building a full-size set. A puppet of Ford was used to create a shadow on the 9-foot tall by 13-foot wide model because Ford had filmed the scene against blue screen, which did not incorporate the shaft of light from the entrance. So that was pretty cool. Like, I think one of my favorite effects was that sequence of Indy walking over that bridge. Like, that was very cool, man. It holds up extremely well for 1989. Like, that was a very breathtaking little scene to watch. And it beats a lot of special effects scenes that we've seen today very recently. Now, this next bit of information goes into more detail about the scene where Donovan dies and how they captured that whole sequence of him aging very rapidly and then turning to dust. So Spielberg wanted Donovan's death shown in one shot, so it would not look like an actor having makeup applied between takes. Inflatable pads were applied to Julian Glover's forehead and cheeks by Nick Dudman that made his eyes seem to recede during the character's initial decomposition, as well as a mechanical leg that grew his hair. The shot of Donovan's death was the first all-digital composite scene in a movie, and it was created over 3 months of morphing together 3 puppets of Donovan, created by Stephen Dupulis, in separate stages of decay, a technique ILM mastered on Willow, which came out in 1988. A 4th puppet was used for the decaying clothes because the puppet's torso mechanics had been exposed. Complications arose because Alison Duty's double had not been filmed for the scene's latter 2 elements, so the background and hair from the first shot had to be used throughout, with other faces mapped over it. Donovan's skeleton was hung on wires like a marionette. It required several takes to film it crashing against the wall because not all the pieces released upon impact. So you can just tell, man, like, my gosh, so much work went into, creating a scene that goes by in like 20 or 30 seconds, like in the movie. But man, that stop motion work is insane. Like, the fast aging and everything. Like, dude, even as a kid, that scene scared the crap out of me. Like, this was just like that scene in Raiders where that guy's head shrinks and then the other villain's head melts away, and then Belloc's head literally explodes. Like, that sequence was just violent and unexpected. And Donovan's death is that same level in this. Like, it is horrifying to watch, and frankly, pretty terrifying. Like, that's the one thing about the Indiana Jones franchise that really sticks out, is the fact that the villains in this franchise get extremely horrific deaths. Holy cow, man, they got some of the worst death scenes I've ever seen in a film. Like, each film, they get violent deaths. Very, very bad. So, a son's relationship with his estranged father it has shown to be a very common theme in Steven Spielberg's films, other examples including E.T., The Extraterrestrial, and the movie Hook. The film's exploration of father and sons coupled with its use of religious imagery is comparable to 2 other 1989 films, that being Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and Field of Dreams. Writing for the New York Times, Kyron James felt the culmination in these films reflected New Age concerns where the worship of God was equated to searching for fathers. James felt that neither Indiana nor his father is preoccupied with finding the Grail or defeating the Nazis, but that rather both seek professional respect for one another in their boy's own adventure. James contrasted the temple's biblical epic destruction with the more effective and quiet conversation between the Joneses at the film's end. James noted that Indiana's mother does not appear in the prologue, being portrayed as already having died before the film's events began. Now that's a nice little insight there, you know. I had no idea that Star Trek and Field of Dreams had that same concept. I have not seen, like, the only Star Trek films that I've seen were those 3 new ones they did back in 2009, 2012, and 2016. I have not seen the original show from the 60s, and I have not yet seen any of the Star Trek films from the 80s. I haven't seen Field of Dreams yet. I actually own that movie on VHS. I need to get around to watching it. But I think it's pretty crazy that 2 other films in that same year had similar, you know, stories. And I have to agree with what he says, you know, like, where he talks about how, like, this adventure is more about, you know, a father and a son re-finding themselves and fixing up their friendship. Like, I totally agree with what Kyron had to say. So, the film's teaser trailer debuted in November of 1988 with Scrooged and the Naked Gun. Rob McGregor wrote the tie-in novelization that was released in June of 1989. It sold enough copies to be included on the New York Times bestseller list. McGregor went on to write the first 6 Indiana Jones prequel novels during the 1990s. Following the film's release, Ford donated Indiana's fedora and jacket to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. That's pretty cool, to have some Indiana Jones artifacts being in museums for people to see. Pretty ironic. So the film was released along with its 2 predecessors as part of a trilogy DVD box set which came out in 2003. It contained extra materials and a special documentary covering the production of the films. Sales figures for the box set were extremely successful, and 600,000 copies were sold in the US on the first day of its release. In 2012, the film was released on Blu-ray, along with the 3 other films in the Indiana Jones film series at the time. In 2021, a remastered 4K version of the film was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray, produced using scans of the original negatives. It was released as part of a box set for the then 4 films in the Indiana Jones film series. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 84% based on 136 reviews, with an average rating of 8 out of 10. The site's critics' consensus reads, lighter and more comedic than its predecessor, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade returns the series to the brisk of serial adventure of raiders while adding a dynamic double act between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. Metacritic calculated a weighted average score of 65 out of 100 based on 14 critics, indicating general favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale. The movie won the Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing. It also received nominations for Best Original Score and Best Sound, but lost to Little Mermaid and Glory, respectively. Connery received a Golden Globe Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Connery and the visual and sound effects team were also nominated at the 43rd British Academy Film Awards. The film won the 1990 Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation and was nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama at the Young Artist Awards. John Williams' score won the Broadcast Music Incorporated Award and was nominated for a Grammy Award. So it's like, yet again, I mean, we shouldn't even be surprised by this point of John Williams' music getting an award nomination. I'm like starting to wonder at this point if there's anything that John Williams has composed that hasn't gotten any kind of award nominations. Like, I genuinely want to know. Like, this man has been nominated for so many awards, and he has won so many. I'm kind of curious to see, like, he has to have, like, an awards room in his house somewhere just crammed full of the dozens upon maybe even hundreds of awards that he's won throughout his 40, 50-year career. Like, it is absolutely insane the amount of awards that man has won, but he earned every single one of them because he is one of the greatest composers of our time, and I don't think that man has made one bad film score in his life. I think it's physically impossible for John Williams to make a bad film score. I don't think it's humanly possible. But that was just some more information about the award nominations and wins that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade got. So that about wraps it up for the covering of notes that I found on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But this was one heck of a way to celebrate 35 years. I think this movie is like one of the greatest sequels ever made. And I personally do believe that this one is better than Raiders because I really enjoy the whole dynamic of Indy going on an adventure with his dad. I think this movie is the top tier, like, father-son adventure. I don't think any other films using that dynamic did it as good as this movie did. The chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery is absolutely insane, and I think it was pretty crazy that Sean Connery played Indiana Jones' dad, considering he's only 12 years older than Harrison Ford. Like, that's a pretty crazy thing to realize, but by this time when they were filming, Harrison Ford was 46 years old when they filmed this, but he had the looks of like a mid-30s, guy, so they were able to pull off, Sean Connery looking older, so he generally looked like he could be Indy's dad, so that ended up working, extremely well. And Sean Connery, like, rest in peace, man. He's already been gone, 4 years. He passed away back in 2020 at the age of 90, and he officially retired from acting back in 2006 or 7, I think it was, after The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen came out. That was one of his final films. And I actually found out that Steven Spielberg tried to get him back to play Indy's dad again in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but Sean Connery said no because he was just enjoying, retirement too much. But he did say that it was one heck of an offer, and he would have gladly loved to have come back to play Henry again. But to tell you the truth, I'm actually extremely happy that Connery said no and didn't come back, because Indy's dad passing away, I think, was a very key thing for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull story working extremely well. With Indy losing him and Marcus, and thinking that, he's at that point now in his life where life has nothing else to offer him. Now he's at the point where people get taken away from him. So I think Connery not being in the film actually helped it out a lot, and I think it helped convey the message that it was saying. But I think it did help the movie out, so I think everything worked out in the end. I mean, Connery had nothing else left to prove. He was an amazing actor with a very darn good film career. He did make some questionable choices in the late 90s and early 2000s when he turned down Jurassic Park, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and The Matrix. I cannot believe he turned those down. Like, those were all extremely successful franchises, but nonetheless, he had a very amazing career, and if you're interested, I highly recommend you check out the film called The Untouchables from 1987, where Sean Connery acts alongside Kevin Costner. Sean Connery ended up winning his first Academy Award for that film. It's extremely good. Came out in 1987, and it's a darn good film. I highly recommend you check that out. Like, Sean Connery, rest in peace. You were an amazing actor, and thank you for all the amazing films you left behind for us to watch till the end of time. But I will always remember Sean Connery as Henry Jones. Like, he knocked it out of the freaking park in this film. Like, I can't imagine anybody else playing this role. Like, he was perfection. And the same goes, for everybody else who starred in this. Like, everybody was amazing in this film. There's not one bad performance. Like, everybody who was cast to act in this, they were all just as good. And of course, Harrison Ford was amazing as Indiana Jones. Like, this will be his most famous role. I think this will be the role he'll always be known for. I think second place will definitely be Han Solo, and I would say third would have to be Rick Deckard. But Harrison Ford was absolutely amazing in this one. And Last Crusade is just a action movie masterpiece, and you can't go wrong when you watch this one. So if you have not seen any of the Indiana Jones movies, especially the original trilogy from the 80s, I highly recommend you watch them. This has been an epic adventure so far, and I'm very excited to continue it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this recording, the next film that I will cover is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we will wrap up talking about Indiana Jones. That way I now will have covered all 5 of the Indiana Jones movies. So I hope you enjoyed this recording. I hope you learned some pretty cool information, and I want to personally thank you for listening to this recording, and I hope you learned something pretty cool, and I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I just want to personally thank you for your amazing support. So, until next time, my name is Christian Taylor, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.